whenever you feel like you're ready to take off, we'll get going.
Okay, well, first of all, my name is Matt Dunne.
Yep.
Super simple, 2 syllables. And I'm an Australian artist, photographer, publisher, educator, whatever I need to be to make a living. I used to be a high school teacher.
Okay.
I've worked in universities, but not in art. I never studied art. I have no academic background, which will probably be a theme to preface things. I suppose I'm within the arts areas or within photography. I broadly do 3 things. So one is I take my own photos. I take photos of everything, but I think the work that ends up seeing the light of day is usually about the colonial legacy of Australia and how that is sort of seen in environment particularly.
Yep.
I also own and operate Tall Poppy Press, which is a art book publishing business. We are 19 books in. We're about to celebrate 5 years.
Wow.
And that's probably, I think, the umbrella that more people would have encountered my work through, just because there's so much more output. So every book that gets made with Tall Poppy Press, I have a hand in the one selecting the work, and then 2, the editing, and often the design, and then the printing. And then I also run workshops in Australia, although occasionally New Zealand. This is sort of a chance to bring some of my educational background and philosophy about bookmaking and publishing and photography and just kind of bring people up. I think a lot of what I do as a publisher and educator is about making the art world bigger and enabling more people. I think maybe it's the Australian in me, maybe it's just the dickhead in me, but I'm very anti-elitist. So I'd rather more people participate rather than fewer.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think that's one of the main reasons why.
No, stop, that's a stupid idea, you insane person. No one's going to disagree with that.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I definitely wanted to talk with a publisher, but I definitely wanted to talk with someone that I felt was maybe a little bit more aligned with some of the things that I feel about the industry, and I definitely feel like what you've done with Tall Poppy Press is definitely a platform to elevate people. And I guess to start things off, how did Tall Poppy Press come to be, and what opportunity did you see, or what opportunities did you see that were lacking in Australia in the art book world? And also what made you decide to kind of work exclusively with Australian-based artists?
I think I'm someone who I would say I work very iteratively, so I don't sort of sit down and plan things out to the nth degree. So a lot of the origin stories are kind of fairly piecemeal and lots of building blocks over time. So, I was interested in making books. I lived in rural Australia for a long time. That's where I first got into photography.
Okay.
And then a lot of what I was seeing was online, because that was the only way to do it. And I remember really vividly on Tumblr, somebody uploaded one of Ray Meeks's, when he used to make books by hand.
Yep.
And they were $40. Brian McSwain, who might be familiar to some people, had a great Tumblr account, still active. You can still see those pictures. And I thought, wow, this is beautiful. And it was beautiful not because it was perfect, but because it was just so and made. I thought, I want to try and do something like that, but maybe not yet. Fast forward a few years, I take some bookbinding classes. I enjoy it. I make my own books by hand. I learned a lot. I like making one, do not like making 10. Around 2019 or 2020, I finished a body of work that got picked up by Void to be published. So Void's a Greek publisher, or publisher based in Greece. And through working with them, I sort of was look, there's 2 parts to publishing. There's the sort of design side, which is infinitely creative, and you'll never really you've never really done it. You've just kind of keep learning. But then there's the actually like getting something made side, and that is like just emails and just talking to suppliers. And it's like, hey, I've had a real job. I've sent emails and talked to suppliers. I've gotten things made. I felt through that experience, like even just sitting on the sidelines watching somebody else make books, I was like, again, creative side aside, it's not that hard. It is not that hard to find a printer, email them, get a quote, you know, and get something made. But then Tall Poppy, I think I was like, look, I don't want to be one of those people who publishes a book of my own, publishes a book of my best friend, publishes a book of my other best friend, and then runs out of friends. So I needed to have a little bit of a guideline or an umbrella or an ethos or something to kind of focus it. And at that time, I was also had a little website called Tending to the Garden, where I would interview Australians or review Australian books. I think that I sort of adopted a little bit of an identity of a cheerleader, or no one asked me to do this. I just thought it would be good. I really was impressed by a lot of my peers. I thought they were doing really good stuff. I thought there were people that were doing great things that weren't very interested in self-promotion or documentation. And I wanted to kind of just have a place where I could write about some of these things or tell the world what I thought was really cool that was happening here. And, you know, this was not a particularly large circulation, like it never really grew that big. But in its time, you know, I think it meant something to the people that I would reach out to and say, hey, I've been noticing what you're doing, can I interview you? Or I'd buy a book and review it, and I wouldn't tell people I was going to do that until there was this review of their book online. So that kind of like trying to be the guy for the community here, for some reason just felt important. And then once I kind of put two and two together, I was like, what if I just published Australian artists? It took me an embarrassingly long number of time, like years, to think of that idea, like given how basic it is. And I thought, great, that's the business. There were other ideas I had, like I wanted to make it financially fair. You know, I wanted people who I published not to need to have money in order to get a book made. I wanted to be very flexible with the type of book we made. You know, for some projects, I originally sketched out like maybe there are 100 books, maybe there are 50, maybe there are 200. Like, I'd rather be flexible in that. And then I think also like just wanting to, whatever we make, have some kind of, you know, I would call it back then, 6 years ago now, you know, a complete package. Like the book's there, it's well photographed, maybe somebody reviews it, we do a nice launch. It doesn't matter if it's 50 or 500 copies, we just try and have that experience. So I think there was sort of, you know, I had this kind of North Star of, I don't want to start anything until I can see it having a 10-year lifespan. Maybe it won't, but the idea has to have a 10-year minimum potential. And if it doesn't, then I just need to think about it more. Because I'd started a few small things, like a few little websites and a few little and they were fun. Like, you know, maybe they were around for a year or two and it was really cool. But I was getting a little bit sick of just like, you know, having these like throwaway short-term things where after a year or two, I was kind of bored of it. I guess that's the origin story, just kind of little bits and pieces, a bit of a embarrassingly simple idea that really hit me like a thunderbolt. And then just thinking a little bit about what kind of business I'd want to create.
Well, I think it's, you know, I think there are very, very few stories that exist where somebody has an idea and it's that thing right there from the get-go. Most of the time it's accretion over time. You know, it's one idea leads to another idea, to meeting someone else, and things just organically grow and build from there. And I think kind of like branching off of like everything that you were just talking about, you know, talking about how like, you know, like the press came to be, as a photo book publisher, you know, how do you kind of like promote heterogeneity instead of homogeneity with what projects you choose to publish, you know, the materials that you're using for the making of the aesthetic object, as well as like, you know, like the trim size, the design of your books? How do you view that kind of role as playing a curator, that, you know, you're making a recognizable book within your brand, but also without being very hegemonic about the process?
I mean, I think like for people at home, there's a line on our website that just says, you know, we find hegemony boring and unpredictable, or maybe boring and unsatisfying. And I think when I talk about boring books, people who hear that often have a reaction of going, oh, you don't want to make a standard book, so you want to make a sort of, you know, bespoke object that unfolds into a hat or something. And what I like about the way you phrased your question is making something a little bit different is the aim. Making something that is a little bit unique is the aim. The aim is not to recreate what a book is, because I'm not interested in that. The aim is to move away from things that could be a Bob Adams book from the 70s as a default. And I think that often, you know, again, to sort of explore my position before giving some examples, I often think about music and sort of, you know, if somebody came to me and said, you know, I really want to make a classic rock album, you know, like I really love the Beatles and the Stones, you know, you should go ahead and do it if that's your creative vision. I mean, you should live your life. Even within a sort of fairly classic genre, it's like, well, what can you do that's a bit new? Or what can you know, what are some things that you can bring, some textures or sounds that weren't easily available then? Or, you know, like,
absolutely.
You're in the big track recording, saying you have 32. Is there like something fun you can do with the vocals? Doesn't have to be like, all right, you know, oh, don't make classic rock, dude. You've got to make electronic dance music. It's like, no, you can stay within your creative sphere without repeating and being stuck in that kind of the same mode.
Yes.
Although if you want to, of course, you know, no one should stop you. So for me, you know, if I think about the books that we make, you know, I would say that over time, texture has probably become one of the hallmarks of a tall poppy book. And I think of texture not just in terms of the paper and the cover, but also of the size of the book. I talk to a lot of people about, you know, a book is a piece of art that sits in your hand. You feel it. If you go to a museum and you're looking at prints or paintings, you know, you can't touch them, and that's fine. You know, that's important. They're going to last. But a book is something you actually get to interact with. So it has to feel good. There's lots of ways to feel good. Something can feel good because it has a really, you know, pleasing texture. Something can feel good because it has an unpleasant but surprising texture. Something can feel good because it's soft and floppy and just opens when you blow on it. And something can feel hard because something can feel good because there's a bit of structure to it. I personally have a preference towards a slightly smaller book. I'm not the biggest person. I have a few like old like Mark Rudell books that are beautiful and well printed, but to look at them on anything other than a table is actually quite so easy to drop them. And I just don't want to fight the book. I don't want to have arms doubly as long. I think for me as well, like I like working with materials with personality. I find that, again, a discussion I've had with a lot of people, maybe you could say a debate I've had with lots of people, is like, I don't actually regard the photographs or the original artwork as the most important part of the book. It's equally a part of the book. It's the building blocks along with the other things. So sometimes you choose paper that feels really amazing, but it raises the blacks, you know, from a true black to something like a little bit off. Or, you know, there's a book I printed that has so many gorgeous blues and yellows, and I really wanted to print that on brown paper, but I just couldn't get it across the line with the artist because they felt it would really change their pictures, which it would. But to me, like, that personality is so fascinating and a little bit underexplored. There was a year, for example, maybe it was, I don't know, 2019 or 2022, where it felt like every MacBook was exactly the same size, used exactly the same coated matte paper. And it was just like such, not that I like a lot of MacBooks any longer, I mean, they've changed a lot, but it just felt like, what's the point? Like, this is just kind of cookie cutter, play by numbers. And I knew why they selected those materials. They're easy to ship, they're easy to print, the color reproduction is very manageable. You can color match from dark group prints, blah, 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 blah. Like, there are reasons for this. But it felt slightly unalive, not dead, but just kind of, oh, okay, another thing like this. So I think for me, like, it's not, we don't really have like a house brand or anything, or maybe we do and I'm too stupid to see it. But what we do have, I think, is kind of an ethos about, like, we want to make it interesting. We want to make it good to feel. We want to make it easy to use.
Oh, that makes total sense. I mean, I only have one of your books, and that's Odette England's To Be Oh God, I'm going to butcher this thing. God, I have it in front of me. To be developed, to be continued. Yes, and I think the thing that struck me about that book was the paper that was chosen in that book reminded me of a type of paper that I use here at home religiously, which is paper I get at the dollar store. It's just from sketchbooks I get at the dollar store. And it's this kind of like creamy off-white with this like really nice textured surface. And
Yeah.
I love printing on that paper because it just renders the image in almost like I would say almost like kind of like a bit like a like a faded Polaroid would have, like like the curve on it has like a lift to it. Of course, if you want to adjust that in post to like compensate for the paper, you can. But I just like the natural like way it comes out of the printer. It could just be the combination I have here at home. But like that struck me right away. I was like, oh, this is a texture I recognize that I love using, but this is a texture that I don't think I would see a lot of people kind of gravitate towards because of the inconsistencies in the paper and because it doesn't necessarily render the image super sharp, or the blacks aren't super rich, or the color rendering is a little bit, I don't know, like muddy, I guess would be a word for it. But I don't know, it's just something about it. Just like I was like, I recognize this. This is so cool to see like a publisher using a much higher grade quality than my dollar store paper. But I was just like, I recognize this and I like this. Like this is something like.
I mean, it's not. Like that paper is one that if you go to any art store in Australia, you can buy sketch pads for like $5 with like, and it's great. It's a great paper. And we've made a few books on papers with similar qualities, texture, off-white, and I'm sure there's people that don't like them. I'm sure there are people that get the books and go, oh, this isn't really my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people like them. And I suppose I found it very affirming that in general, people respond to personality. If you make a book that's very safe, it's unlikely to have any haters, but it's perhaps unlikely to have any true fans. Whereas if you make a book, and again, a slightly different paper is not a huge risk here, in my opinion, you will have people that are like, I really like this quality about it. I mean, we made a book a few years ago that's quite small, like it's quite physically small. And some people don't like it because it's small. It's not their thing. But we've also had so many people go, I love the small book. I love how easy it is. I can just put it in my bag. I don't have to worry about taking it home from the fair or whatever. It's really cheap to ship. So bookstores are always happy to pick some up. And maybe not the most interesting reason to make a choice, but actually a very important reason to make a choice. Like books that we've thought about making, but like I just can't ship them. Like I can't get book mailers that will ship them effectively. So it's just not reasonable.
It's not practical. Absolutely. I picked up a book like that. Luckily enough, Deadbeat was in Montreal for book opening for Maud Arsenault's book, and they had The Lizard by, I forget his name now, but it's the biggest book in my entire collection. And like they were really happy to sell it to me because they're like, this is impossible to ship. It's like it's just because we came here with our big suitcases, we were able to sell it to you today. I was like, thank you, because I couldn't afford the shipping on that.
I feel really bad. They sent me a copy to review and I gave it quite a negative review. And given how expensive it would have been to ship to Australia, you never feel shit about saying something that you feel is true. But
of course.
Like, they kind of reached out to me to review something, and I don't know. It just felt like if it was a little book and it was easy and it wasn't that expensive, you'd feel like, okay, but it must have cost $60 or $70 to ship to me.
I'm sure it's probably the same retail as the book itself.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And kind of like branching off when we were talking about, the qualities of the books, like that you guys produce, like what are some of the key things that you're looking for when you're considering putting out a new edition? What is it about a project that gets you excited, or what is it about an artist in particular that kind of like excites you or inspires you and kind of motivates you to bring that body of work and put all the time and effort into turning that body of work into an aesthetic object like a book?
I think it's actually easier to talk about the artist than the work sometimes, because I think work, often what you're looking for is something that like hooks you and excites you. And it's sometimes very hard to describe or define or find patterns in that. I'm a fairly like voracious person when it comes to art and books and everything. So I'm always looking at people's websites, their social media, their exhibitions, and I have a pretty wide taste. There's some things that I'm not particularly interested in. Like we've never done a book that's like very heavy on nudes, for example, because it's very rare that I'm excited by that. To finish up, like, you know, what about the work? I mean, you want something that's relatively well developed. So, you know, it could be 50% finished, it could be 80% finished, it could be 100% finished. But whatever the artist is trying to do, it's fairly evident. Sometimes you reach out to people and they still want to work for a while, but, you know, they're not going off in a completely crazy direction. They're sort of refining or adding. You want something that you look at and go, oh, I'm thinking of books. Something in this is speaking to me and saying, oh, that could be cool printed like this or like that or at this size. You almost want that spark to hit you in terms of the format that you look at and you go, I think there's an audience for this. Because, you know, I run a business, so there's lots of things that I would love to make a book of. I love the work, but I just don't know if I can sell 200, 300, 400, 500.
Yeah.
Maybe I could, and often other people can, but can I? So again, you know, coming back to the fact that we've not done much nude, like occasionally something will come to me and it's like, you know, work that's kind of about, you know, is it pornography? Is it sexy? Is it selfie? Like, and that's just not an area that I have much experience in editing or making books in. I don't know if our audience, such as it is interested in that at all. So is there an audience for that work, for example? Definitely. But is it within my reach? Maybe. That's something you've just got to think about that a little bit more. So that's probably the trifecta. Like the work is exciting to me. Who knows why? When I'm looking at it, I can think of, oh, this could be a book. Like I have that gut reaction. And then when I sit down and think about the business case, I feel it's strong. I guess the thing, like I said, that's easier is actually the artists. I mean, the artists and I have to get along. You know, there are people I've met up with and maybe the business case is good, maybe the work is good, and we just are kind of awkward together. You think, do you really want to, you know, because when you make the book, let's say it's 18 months, 12 months, 18 months working together to make the book. But then there's another 6 to 12 to 18 months of selling it. You know, at a point, artists usually get a little bit sick of promoting their own books, which is fine. It sort of just 100% falls to me. But the book isn't over when it arrives in the shed. You know, the book's kind of over when you've sold out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Although I like the selling. So to me, it's not sad. I enjoy selling books. That means getting along with those people is, you know, it could be a 3 or 4 year relationship. It could be quite a bit longer. I mean, there are people I've been working with, you know, for 4 years in different capacities. So for example, Rochelle Marie Adam, who was the first book we published a second book with her. She's also represented us at book fairs that I haven't been able to get to, you know, may very well do so again. She lives in the East Coast of the USA. It's a long way from me. So that's someone who, you know, had a 5 year working relationship with. Not every day, not every week, but that's a really good example of why that match is more important than the work.
Absolutely, yeah.
Unless the one exception to that is if you're working towards, and I haven't done much of this, but if you're working towards like an institutional thing, like an institutional catalog, or where it's like a team that has a very defined, like it's almost like a project management thing, then those, you know, you just need to be professional. So what makes a good collaborator? I mean, like, do we get along? Do we have a similar sense of humor? I tend to deal really badly with highly anxious people. They stress me out. I stress them out. It's a fucking disaster. Everyone's a bit anxious, but someone that is like a deep perfectionist, constantly worried, can never find any solace or calm. It's absolutely a no. It's just a straight up no. You know, I'm not a perfectionist. Perfectionism is just anxiety and insecurity pretending to be productivity. And it's just not a pleasant experience for anyone. So I think there are publishers that are quite good working with people that have that real drive to make something truly the best in every way, exhaustively and often unpleasantly.
Mhm.
I'm not one of them. So I think that's for me a really big red flag, because it brings out the worst in me. Whereas people that are, have other kind of forms of nervousness or uncertainty or doubts, I think I'm a lot better at kind of bringing them along and helping them feel excited and comfortable and confident.
No,
So,
no, I
yeah,
think everything that you're bringing up, I think is really important. I think it's something that's often one of the biggest things that's overlooked by people who are reaching out to publishers to get a body of work published is they're thinking usually just about the work itself, what they're presenting, like what this package I have is presenting. They're forgetting that, like their personality has to match with the personality that they're, applying to potentially work with. Because like you said, I mean, most books are going to be like a 2-year relationship minimum, you
yeah,
know and within that time frame, like there's going to be a lot of tough decisions. There's going to be a lot of headaches that are going to have to be worked around. It's not easy breezy, happy go lucky experience. It is a wonderful experience, and it's a great chance to collaborate, but at the same time, like there are like hard decisions to make within that process and sacrifices to make. And so you have to make sure that you're going to be able to get along with that person and get through all those kind of like decision making processes. So I think that's like something like really important that you brought up, because I think a lot of people kind of need to consider that a little bit more whenever they're reaching out. And it's the same thing with like publishers too. Like vice versa. You have to make sure that like the publisher that you're going to be working with is the right match for you, because like you said, maybe you're a very anxious person and you're working with you're applying to work with a slow publisher. They take a year and a half to 2 years to put out a book,
yeah.
and you're going to be emailing them every 3 months, like what's going on with my book. Well, that's probably not the right person to work with. You probably want to work with someone who's a little bit more outgoing to get things out into the world at a quicker pace. So it's a really interesting process. And
Yeah.
kind of like branching off of that, I'm kind of curious. You recently published one of your own books through your own press, 1080. And I was kind of curious, like, what made you choose to do that through your own edition, seeing that your first book, The Killing Sink, was published by another publisher? Like, what was kind of like your thought process going into that? Was it just more like like easy accessibility? You kind of like the game, what you want to make, and you can just make it happen, or
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I sort of like, you own a business that sells books. It's like, why wouldn't I work with myself? It's funny, like sometimes I'll be at a book fair. Most often this happens in Europe or America, to be honest. And I'll have copies of The Killing Sink. There's still a few kicking around. And people will be like, oh, that's a Void book, but you're not Void. And I'll say, well, I'm Matt. This came out before I started Tall Poppy Press, like
yeah.
6 months before. So and most people get it, it's not a very complicated story. But I think for me, there just didn't seem to be any upside to shopping around for a publisher. Whereas doing it myself meant I could find I could select the collaborators that I was going to get the most out of. I'm a really bad editor of my own work because I get confused, I get stuck in my own head, I spin my wheels, and every new dummy I make gets worse and stupider. So for example, like the person who did a lot of the work on that book, Sasha Taylor, is a designer who also has like a very strong editorial voice.
Okay.
And we get along very well. She's very kind and thorough. That was the sort of collaborator I needed, where it's like, hey, I can handle printing, I can fund it, I can handle shipping, I can handle organizing a launch and exhibition. That is fine. What I can't handle is how the fuck do I turn years of work and research into something that's legible and interesting? Because I really am sort of too much in the thick of it. So initially, not knowing anything about printing and stuff, that's a great place to seek a publisher. But now, working with printers, having a really good idea of like costs and budgets and things like that. The designers, but the editor/designer in Sasha is the the person I wanted to work with. I would never be able to publish a book like that 100% under my own steam.
Okay.
And there will be a day where I can do that with my own work, but it'll be a much tighter and less complicated story. So I think that, the reason is just like, okay, I'm selling books, why not sell my own book? But then also like still wanting a collaborator, but knowing what kind of collaborator I wanted. And something that irked me a little bit, irked is maybe a bit strong, something that I found out working with Void is like, I want people to talk to me constantly. Like, hey, Matt, here's an update about the book or whatever. Or if I email them, they'll email me back.
Yeah.
But I think one of the work cultural differences between Australia and maybe parts of Europe, and Joao, the designer, is Brazilian, so there's also that as well. I don't know anything about Brazilian work culture, is just sort of the frequency and expectations of communication is perhaps quite different. It's nobody's fault. No one's doing the wrong thing. No one's being unprofessional or bad. But those expectations were mismatched.
Mhm.
Whereas here, working with an Australian designer, I know that we'll set a timeline. I'll know that we'll, one of our first things when we agree to work together will be setting out key dates, and that the designer will meet them if I meet mine.
Yeah.
I guess because this is the place I've lived and worked most of my life, I just feel more comfortable operating that way.
No, that makes complete sense to me, because I think if I were working with someone, I would probably have the same expectations too, and I would probably want to work with someone within North America that kind of like understands like the same kind of like landscape. It makes a lot of sense. It all depends on your personality, right? It's going back to what we were talking about.
And your experience. I mean, again,
exactly. Yeah.
I don't. Australia's not a it's not a one size fits all place. Like there are lots of people that if I describe that, they're like, well, that's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But within most professional workplaces that I've been in, those are sort of some of the things that just happen, and I suppose I've just gotten used to them.
No, that makes total sense. And kind of like working as like as a publisher, how do you view sustainability, both in terms of kind of like edition sizes, how many projects you actually publish, the materials, the cost of distribution and all that kind of things, and navigating what seems to be at the moment, perhaps I don't want to use words like oversaturated, because I don't want to project my own thoughts onto a market that is completely its own thing and everybody has their own thoughts and ideas about it. But kind of like, how do you view sustainability in this kind of market where it seems like most of the time like edition standards are between like 500 to 1,000 copies, which for a lot of artists doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. Like sometimes just 100 editions is all an artist needs and stuff like that. So just kind of like wondering like how you view that whole kind of like sustainability idea within the photo book industry.
So I have a lot to say on this. So this could quite easily be like a 20 or 30-minute conversation if you're interested. So I think what I'd say here is I think about financial sustainability every single day. I have spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets. And there is something that you'll often hear online about, like, there's no money in photo books, it's a dying industry, blah, 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 blah. And that is a very unnuanced opinion. It is true at times that certain products just aren't competitive. If you think about the times we're in now, there's a lot of economic uncertainty. There's been a lot of inflation. Housing's quite expensive for a lot of people. So large, prestige, expensive books are hard to afford, harder than they were coming out of COVID, which was a bit of a new time. So it's easy to oversaturate the top end of the market. For example, a Stanley Barker book, once you pay for shipping and conversion rates in Australia, we're probably talking somewhere between 100 to 130 Australian dollars. That's how much that book costs. That price range, I think, is hard to sustain unless the publisher has artists with quite a lot of cachet.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you look at Stanley Barker, I mean, when was the last time they published somebody's first book? I mean, have they ever done it? Unless that person had been working for like 10, 20, 30 years. When was the last time they published a book by somebody with like under 30,000 Instagram followers?
Yep.
Conversely then, if somebody's publishing their first book self-published or working with a small publisher, I would say, before you think about edition sizes or anything like that, like think about the price point. Again, in Australia, some advice I got from Dan Rule at Perimeter Books very early on is something that's around $50 Australian is something that's very easy for people to say yes to. Your mum can buy a copy, your best friend can buy a copy, the person online that's been following your work for a while can buy a copy. It's not an intimidating amount of money. So for us, our books sit somewhere between 50 to 80 Australian dollars. And that's a huge part of what makes us sustainable and financially viable, is because if I go to Europe, America, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, China, Singapore, my books are affordable by plenty of people that come to have a look. If a shop in Vermont wants to buy copies of a book, it's affordable for them to do so, pay for shipping, and still sell and make a bit of money. That price point excludes certain types of books and projects. It reduces the amount of money that we can pay artists. But there's no point having a book that, if it sells, we can pay people lots of money and then it doesn't sell. So to me, the part of sustainability that I think is really vital for people who, if you're a Stanley Barker, if you're a Mac, if you're an Aperture, these doesn't really apply. I think you're operating, you have your own distribution, your own warehouses. Like, I don't know anything about that type of business. But if you're someone at sort of my scale or self-publishing, I think the first thing you really need to think about is, what is a good offer for a customer in terms of price? What's the most interesting iteration of my work I can make that's going to hit that price point? Now, again, there are differences. I'm a really big fan of Harrison Miller, who almost, the publishing he does almost takes the opposite approach, where, they only publish 100. They're fairly expensive. They've got handmade elements to them. It's a little bit more of an artisan process rather than sort of an industrial one like I make. Or Edizioni Origini, the Italian, they do everything by hand, and those books are probably about $200 each, and I think they only make sort of 80 to 200 copies.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely ways where the price can be justified and there can be a market for it. But I think that fundamentally sustainability in terms of finances, you're making a book is for Tall Poppy Press a retail object. Some of our books have a really good home in libraries and museums and references. Like that is true, but that is a minority. Most of our sales are to customers or to stores that can sell to customers. So you've sort of got to marry your artistic and creative interest with the reality that you are selling a retail product. There's some advantages to that, like there are so many ways to get good advice about retail objects. There's a wealth of information. E-commerce has never been easier. Shipping things around the world has never been easier. I know people whinge about shipping, but I can send a book from Australia to Canada. It takes less than a week and it costs about 30 Australian dollars. It's fucking magic. Pacific Ocean's larger than all the land mass on the planet combined, and it can get you in less than a week. I mean, it's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to start with that, because if you think, okay, I've never made a book before, I'm a younger person, most of my peers, they're sort of in their first few years of their career, my friends and family who are going to support me, and they're always going to show up for you. That's those friends and family and those like core fans that are always going to show up for you. Like, you think, what can they afford? What will they be happy to buy? Think of those people first before you think of some anonymous photo collector who lives in Spain who may never discover you, because that's going to help make better decisions, more sustainable decisions. So if those people are happy to pay, say, $55 Australian, that's what you feel, and your book is costing $40 per copy to make, it's not really sustainable. But, maybe it's fine to make 100, have them at a show, sell out over a year or two, pat yourself on the back. I mean, it's not a terrible decision. For a publishing business, that would never fly. So if you see a price of a Tall Poppy book, unless it's on sale or something, our margins just couldn't be that thin. There's a sort of concept in business that's sort of, my girlfriend will be very annoyed at me that I can't remember it because she's been hammering it into me for years. It's basically, what's the cost of selling something? Because let's say I go to a book fair in Melbourne, and it costs me $400 to be at the book fair, and I sell 50 books. So each book has cost me $8 to sell, plus the printing cost, plus any packaging materials, plus any credit card transaction fees. So each book's probably actually costing me $10 plus the $15 or $20 or $25 in printing. So that's the real cost. And then you have to sort of think about what your margin would be. And I think that a lot of people that are creatives, or maybe like me, have been working in education, you know, this is just a mindset that's unfamiliar. These are sort of terms and calculations that are commonplace in other sectors, easy to find out about, and incredibly helpful in terms of thinking about what should my price point be? How much should I pay to make something? Okay, I'm going to split the money. What can the split be without me going broke? Sustainability of materials, I think, is actually a smaller concern. I mean, most papers are FSC certified now. It's very hard to find ones that aren't working in the places that we work. A lot of uncoated materials and a lot of coated papers have a percentage of recycled. At the same time, I mean, you know, it would be kind of ridiculous to say that every decision we've made is the most sustainable one. We've started shrink wrapping books, which is something I fought for years, but we just had too many that would have their corners knocked about in transit or something like that. And, you know, you throw out a couple of books and suddenly the plastic doesn't look so bad. There aren't, you know, really great options for that, again, within the world that we live in, which is that if people get something with damaged corners, they will often want to return it.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we were in a place where people were like, oh, it wasn't protected, but that's a sustainability choice and I'm okay with that, we can potentially look at changing that again. I think the other thing that's sort of really interesting in terms of sustainability and edition sizes is I would say that there are markets or segments of the market that are very overcatered to, and segments of the market that are exceptionally ignored. There's an example I often give in these conversations. There's a local photographer called Warren Kirk. Like, no one in Photoland has heard of this guy, right? He's a documentary photographer in Melbourne. Okay. And he's had 2 or 3 books out, which, you know, the ones that I'm thinking of are basically pictures of people's homes from the 60s and 70s and 80s that have a very specific character tied to migration from Greece, Italy, and Lebanon.
Oh, okay.
So basically, like, you know, people whose families moved here in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s from those 3 countries, bought a lot of houses at that time, decorated them specific ways. And he just takes pictures of the interiors and exteriors. And I don't know how many books he's printed, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was 10,000. You know, it's very easy to go into a bookshop in any state in Australia and find copies. They've been out a long time. I'm sure they've done reprints. But this is a book that, you know, people will buy who've never bought a photo book in their lives because it reminds them of their cousin or their aunt or their home. Or they give it as a gift to their grandma or something like that. And it's bizarre because it's hyper local, but that actually means it has a much clearer reach. And I think the sort of like soft boy black and white community, of which I'm lovingly a member, I mean, we probably, like, how many more books, you know, making for each other? I mean, make whatever you want. I'm going to continue to do it too. But I think that's something where you can say, all right, you know, it's kind of us talking to us. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of thinking of how many do you make, how sustainable it is, just acknowledging that that is a fairly specific niche. Whereas, you know, I think it's Hoxton Mini Press. I mean, they do like 1,000 of any book they make, but they just do archival projects from Britain, and people will pick them up and love them who have never bought an art book before in their lives and perhaps never will again. And it would be difficult to create a business that caters to a market like that unless you've got like a hyper local focus. It's just to say, like, there are segments of the book buying public that are tremendously under catered to.
Oh, absolutely.
And I understand why. Like, it's not something that I'm catering to specifically. But when I hear this line that I'm sure you've heard too, where people say, oh, there's just too many books being made, you know, blah, blah, blah. I just think that's, again, a really unnuanced opinion. There's probably too many of one type of book or too many of one price point. I think you can very easily make an argument there. But I think you couldn't say in general, like, we've reached a maximum number of copies that could be printed in a year, and doing any more is silly. I just think that that's too reductive.
Yeah.
This is kind of interesting because, I'm sure you read last week that Steidel's in potential financial stress.
Yep.
But if ever a bad businessman has existed, how can you buy a Steidel book? Like, you can buy online. I mean, they don't charge shipping. I don't know how the fuck they make that work.
Yeah.
Shipping from Europe to Australia is not cheap.
No.
They have no timelines. There are no fairs. They never have any sales. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. They'll often like put books in discount bins and devalue their own product.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, for all that many people admire the work that they've done, I mean, a ludicrous business.
Yes, absolutely.
And so then sometimes you'll get doom and gloom, like, oh, what does this mean for the market? It means you can't run a crap business in a market with tight margins.
Exactly.
And it's hard to run a good business in a market with tight margins. But ultimately, like, that's the problem you have to solve if you want to be sustainable. And make this your income. I mean, if you just want to put out a book every few years for a sense of satisfaction and because that's what you aspire to, I mean, the sustainability question isn't important. Just work a regular day job and you can pay for books. It's fine. They're not that expensive.
Yeah.
But if you're hoping to kind of make a living to some extent or a portion of your living from selling books, it's a business proposition, as maybe as unpleasant and unfortunate to some people. I like running a business. It's very creative. It's very freeing. I don't hate it. And you don't have to be a big, evil, mean, shitty business to make a living. But you can't be a crappy prestige business with no business plan. If you, again, contrast Steidel and Matt, I mean, you can see which one is run like a business and which one is run like somebody that doesn't ever want to look at a spreadsheet in their life.
Yeah, exactly.
And which one will last?
Yeah.
Is this sort of my like cry? Can I just say one more thing before we move on from that?
Of course.
One of the biggest learnings that I've had as a publisher, an artist, and like working in business is learning from countries that are more similar to mine. Like, I think when I was starting out, because a lot of the English media around these things comes from the States and comes from Western Europe, maybe without even realizing it, I'd sort of absorbed much of the thinking and ideas from those parts of the world. But Australia is so different. The USD and the euro are the two like premier currencies. Just one thing, the Australian dollar isn't. So it's always more expensive for me to do business. Europe has a bajillion book fairs and a huge distribution network and great paper mills on its doorstep and very cheap shipping available, and a single market for a lot of the countries. I mean, it's so different from Australia. And when I started doing book events in Asia, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, these are my people. Like, these are the people that I look at and I go, they're making it work. And I can't listen to Americans. I can't listen to Germans. I can't listen to the Dutch and replicate what they're doing, but I can listen to the Singaporeans or the Thai. Their constraints are similar to mine, and often greater, so for me, I think like looking at more realistic reference points, and spending more time talking to publishers in those parts of the world as best I can has made it much easier to think about the types of books that I can make and sell, rather than, folks that are based in France or wherever. It's just something that, again, I think is really relevant, especially from people like you and me that like, we come from first world countries, but even within first world countries, there's a hierarchy of like what's funded, what's available, what's costed. And you've just got to be, I think if you really want to learn and be insightful, like, let's say you're reading this or listening to this and you're in Portugal, that's even different from if you're in the Netherlands.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I know I feel Canada and Australia share a lot of similarities. I mean, especially in terms of, like, our dollar isn't great either, so having, like buying a book from the States or buying a book from Europe after paying the conversion, after paying the shipping, after paying the import fees, like a book that could have been, like $60, $70 is now like close to $150 after everything is said and done. That's just, like not possible for a lot of people. And also here in Canada, we produce a shitload of paper, that's for sure, but we don't have a lot of great printing presses in Canada that are affordable. There's plenty of printing presses for like mass media type stuff, but for doing other types of things, it's not really something that is easy to find here. And if you do find it, the cost is super elevated because it's, kind of like an underfunded part of the market that, doesn't have that big of a clientele. So I definitely resonate with like a lot of the things that you were saying.
Well, yeah. And like Australia, wages are high. People get paid fairly for their labor in a country that's expensive to live in.
Yeah.
I think one thing that Australia has, Australians are very good at saying everything we don't have, but people in Australia like books. Like we are really lucky. Like there's a lot of book fairs for a country of 25 million people. They're very well attended. People like books here. Melbourne, maybe it's not the case this year, but many years, has the most independent bookstores per person in the world.
Oh, wow.
And, I don't sell a ton to these bookstores, but the point being, people like books here. People, and again, if Singapore is a good example of a fairly affluent society where people really scrimp every dollar, and that's not the case here. If somebody looks at a book that's $52 rather than $48, they sort of lump them into the same price.
Okay.
So, it's easy to talk about what you don't have, and it's easy to say compare yourself to like countries, but there's also home advantages. These can be harder to find sometimes, harder to appreciate, but they are there. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
This sort of stuff lights me up a lot.
No, I totally, I think about this stuff a lot too, even though like I'm not actually working in the industry like you are, but it's something that I'm always constantly thinking about. So I don't totally get it. It's something that amps me up as well. And kind of like, like going on from there, you were mentioning in the beginning that, you started out in education, and, workshops are a big part of what you do with Tall Poppy Press as well. And I'm kind of curious, aside from like, facilitating the opportunity and the environment for people to kind of come in, learn how to edit, sequence, maybe a smidge of designing, and, ultimately, constructing a zine or a maquette, in the workshop with you guys. What else do you teach in these workshops? And why do you think kind of like providing these like small scale opportunities of the larger thing is really important to kind of like have a healthy engagement and awareness of like the photo book industry and the process as a whole?
Well, I think it's important because people want to learn, but they don't want to pay top dollar. I mean, university's gotten pretty expensive here. There should be an alternative. Like I for example, I can't go back to university to study art. Like okay, maybe they'd accept me, but like, I'd be on the street.
Yeah.
Does that mean I can't learn? No, of course not. So where can I go to learn? For me, I went to places like the London Centre for the Book Arts. I went to a bookbinding course that ran at a night school. These were incredibly valuable places, and I learned a lot, and they set me up really well. I want to offer that same experience to people that maybe they have gone to uni and they'd like to keep learning. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they've come to art at a different point in their life like me. My observation is that a lot of people enjoy coming and learning something new. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to then continue it or push forward. I mean, if I think of the number of people that have come to workshops compared to the number of people who have gone and made a self-published book, it's not zero, but it's probably less than 10. Regardless, I know people have had a lovely time. I know that people have maintained good relationships with me afterwards because they come to events and they say hello and they talk about how they've thought about what we've done together. So I think that fundamentally, like, most people in the world enjoy learning new things. And there's a lot of value in creating a pleasant, affordable, accessible format through which people can experience continued learning. Again, if you think about how many top dollar sort of workshop programs there are out there for serious artists, there are plenty of them. and many of them look good, and some of them I would have loved to have done if I could have afforded it. But again, I think that sometimes the gap in our work as kind of artists trying to make the world a bit more interested in art is like, what about the people around the corner? I mean, what would they be interested in doing? I think that's kind of the ethos. You know, I think about like some of the cities in Australia that I've gone and done workshops in. I mean, they just don't have any outside of university. There's like no options. And there probably isn't the population for there to be a full-time option. I mean, there isn't really the population even in Melbourne for there to be a full-time option, unless somebody funded me for a year or two to develop it. You know, there are people that want to learn, and I like working with people that want to learn. I like helping people. I find it very rewarding. I think that's probably the biggest impetus for workshops. But also, you know, for some years, they've been very financially important. You know, when you publish a book, it might take you know, 6 to 12 months before you've made your money back, and then 6 to 12 to 24 months before you've made your profit. Whereas a workshop, you know, it's there and it's done. It's kind of fast money and slow money. But what I'd say about workshops is people like learning. People deserve an opportunity to learn that's accessible and affordable. And that was kind of the gap that the workshops are trying to fill. Whereas you know, things like Reminders, Photography Stronghold offer a very different type of learning where it's like, are you a serious person who can like come for a week or two, have elements of self-directed time, build something up and then publish it? I mean, I'd love to do one of those workshops. And my friends who have done them have said they were exceedingly great. But, you know, for me, like I've had people come who've like just wanted to learn how to bind a book for the first time and leave with 2 books they bound, and it's like stoked.
No, I think too, I think that's something that like, you know, kind of like even talking about, you know, like we were talking about before about, you know, undervalued part of the market, you know, it's kind of the same thing here is, you know, like, I think especially maybe photography in particular, you know, I think it's such a niche kind of like sector of the art market, and it's kind of a sector that kind of really kind of focuses on itself and has a harder, even though like the act of photographing kind of looks at everything, and you know the camera kind of invites everything into a spectrum. It's kind of like a market that has a bit of a harder time looking outside of itself in terms of like, you know, the market that it looks at and types of things like that. Like when we were talking before, you know, like I was reminded of a thing of David Campany whenever he had his American road trip book that he had come out, and he was going to do a book signing, and he was in the bookstore before the signing, and he was trying to find his book in the photography section, couldn't find it there, and they were like, "Oh well, no, it's in the travel photography section." He's like, "Why is it in the travel photography section?" Like, wow, I mean, it's sold like a large amount of copies. So like, do you want me to, do you want us to put it back in the photography section? He's like, no, of course not, because it makes sense because it's reaching a broader audience that way, because it's been recontextualized, not just as like, you have to be interested in photography to look at this book. You can look at it in a broader context. And I think it's the same thing with like workshops where, you know, like, yeah, if you want to continue on and do something serious with whatever project that you came to the workshop with, of course, go on and go forward and do that. But like you said, some people just want to come in there, learn how to bind a book. Some people are just like, you know, like I have family photographs, and instead of like, you know, buying an album at, you know, like whatever local art shop, or, you know, like here I would say like something like Walmart or something like that, instead of like buying something mass produced, I just want to make something that, you know, like I made with my own hands. And that's a totally
It's so interesting. Like I've sort of stopped doing workshops recently because with my daughter, like, so I have a 5-month-old daughter, I just would rock up to them and be exhausted and feel like I just didn't want to be doing it, and I was a crap teacher. And then I sort of became aware of, there's a woman in Sydney who basically like makes photo books with people, but they're basically like, her whole thing is like, your photos deserve to be preserved. And from what I can observe, most of the people that go are people that are like, oh, I'd love to like make a printed version of like these holiday photos or family Christmas or whatever. And like, she's selling out and people are having a good time and they're proud of what they make. And again, these are very different people. Like if someone was an educator, like how you would facilitate something, you know, for folks like that is really different. But again, you know, I think about a lot of my challenges, like trying to make a life in the arts and be able to live not paycheck to paycheck. And And often those people are really fun to work with. They're really lovely. You know, they love their photos. They're easy to please. I don't know. I kind of love that. Because again, I think there's this sort of duality of like photography being kind of a rare or rarefied, like nerdy medium. But then the fact that like literally everyone around the world is taking a bajillion photos all the time.
Yeah.
And like photography very much is like the language that we live in, like advertising, you know, like the government, you know, if they want to show you something like a public health announcement, like photography informs that more so than illustration or painting or sculpture. You know, probably only video is the other medium that has the same mass language. So there's this real duality of you know, kind of niche abstracted art projects feeling like they're not having breakthrough. And then you look around, you're like, but photos have breakthrough everywhere, all the time, nonstop. And it's okay it's okay to make things that aren't for everyone. But I don't know if that necessarily speaks much about the medium or just a certain type of practice. In the same way that like, just because video is popular and YouTube is consumed a bazillion times does not necessarily mean that like somebody's 10-minute silent film will have traction.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think if those people felt like, oh, no one's interested in moving image anymore or film or whatever, I'd be like, I feel like that is not true. I just feel like you're working within a niche, which is fine. I work within niches too. But I don't actually think that your experience of creating something within a niche extrapolates to anything meaningful about the medium.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And kind of like carrying on, I wanted to like kind of close out our conversation by talking a little bit about your own kind of like photography. And, you know, the first question I wanted to ask before I move on to the other one was, do you ever find it difficult having a part of your identity kind of being synonymous with publishing other people's work? And have you ever kind of felt perhaps that, you know, since starting Tall Poppy that, you know, kind of dedicating a large portion of your time to champion other people's photography, that your own target photographic practice has taken a bit of a sideline to that?
I think it has, but I like that. I do not find it hard. I actually find it easier. You know, I remember going to like openings and stuff and trying to meet people and make friends, and I'm so terrible in that environment. You know, I'm not great in noisy places. I tend to shrink rather than expand. I say things that are really awkward and stupid, and then I feel really dumb afterwards. But behind a table with some books, I've really come alive. So I actually find that having more of my identity tied to a specific role or contribution has made my life bigger and my peer group much larger, and also made me feel a lot more comfortable meeting so many people in so many different environments and connecting more quickly and with less foot in mouth awkwardness. So I think I thrive if I have a role, and if I'm just floating around, I think I'd rather be at home. When it comes to my own work, so much of my work is very logistically annoying. Like, you know, so I can't actually do it all the time. Like I can't be in a car driving around the desert for more than a couple of weeks a year. At the moment, it's 0 weeks a year until my daughter's older. So I can't work on it every day. I can't make things every day. Making books and working with other people enables me to be creative every day. I don't actually want to make my own work every day. I don't think I don't know. I work better in short, concentrated bursts where I'm really focused and I can push the rest of the world aside and just narrow down. But I can't do that for more than a week or two at a time. I just miss home. I miss everybody. I miss everything too much. So I was never going to be someone who's just like pushing their own stuff all the time, because the way I work best is just so sporadic. So I think that my answer is like, yes, and how wonderful to have other ways to contribute, how wonderful to have other ways to come out of my shell, how wonderful to have other ways to be creative when my own work is just kind of trundling along. I think probably like most artists, I still have feelings like, you know, I'll go to a museum and see someone's work and think, you know, when will I get to be here? And, I think that probably never is the most likely answer, but I don't think that would change if this was the only thing I was doing. I think I just allow myself to feel those feelings of missing out or hunger or ambition or inadequacy, and just acknowledge that like, that is just life. Like, wouldn't matter what field I was in, it wouldn't matter what job I'd have. there'd still be instances of going, when will Matty get his time?
Yeah.
And the answer to that question is probably never. And there's still a really great life outside of those spaces.
Oh no, absolutely. And I mean, I think, in a historical context too, I think we often forget how many people that, we, especially in a museum setting, that they never got to experience their work being in the museum, and even in their lifetime. It wasn't until,
Yeah.
decades or, 100 years after, that they were rediscovered and put up on a wall. And they probably spent their whole entire life asking those same questions too. And kind of like, continuing along with your work to kind of close things out, one of the things that I found really interesting about, specifically the two books that you have published was you kind of work through animals. And I was just kind of wondering, the Killing Sink is about the wedge-tailed eagle. 80, sorry, I'm going to mess that up. 1080 is about dingoes. And I was kind of like curious as why, animals became like a vessel for you to kind of like explore the really complex ideas of ecology, environmentalism, colonialism, especially myth, folklore, injustice, and politics, and kind of like weave that all in through storytelling through, I don't want to say a singular entry point, but kind of like using like, a singular entry point to expand into a massively plural and nuanced kind of subject matter.
It's such a good question. And I think when you sent it to me, I was like, I actually have never thought about some of the words you've used to describe my work, but they're very accurate. I think there's a few things. There's probably 4 or 5 sort of dot points to my answer. One is I'm interested in it. I mean, if you're going to make something for a long time, you've got to be interested in it. And animals, alongside with many other parts of ecology, fascinate me. Taking pictures of animals really fascinates me. Taking pictures of plants, I really love doing. But the second point, animals are legible to people. For example, trying to take pictures of the colonial history of Australia through plants is hard because the way that we read plants is often very illiterate. So there's a huge barrier before people start being able to unpack these things. Whereas somebody holding a trophy animal is instantly legible, and you can start to lead people through these things. I think also I have something to say about photography's role with animals. Like as an artist, I'm trying to define maybe my own addition to that curve. I would say like the language of photography with animals, advocating for animals specifically, often, kind of Disneyifies them. So, for example, with dingoes, dingoes are kind of like coyotes in Australia, that are roughly same size. Advocacy organizations almost exclusively photograph puppies, or a sort of very happy-looking dingo, but very rarely will have a dingo with bloody piece of kangaroo in its mouth walking away from a kill. So the anthropomorphization of the animals, the emphasis of their pet-like nature, as a form of engendering sympathy and empathy is something that's been very effective and important, but ultimately I find disrespectful. It doesn't represent the animal in its totality, doesn't take it on its terms, which is what I want my photography to try and do. I like eagles because they are predatory and intense and strong and untamable. I like dingoes because they're aloof, and when they hunt, it's brilliantly brutal. Those are not qualities I necessarily want in like my child or my parents, but these are qualities that I really admire in other animals. There's a tenacity, and I don't think photography that advocates for these things has done that. Photography that's used to criticize the animals is great at finding, suddenly there are all these images of them killing things and bringing down things and causing problems. But photography that speaks on the same side and wants to try and represent the totality of the animal, in Australia at least, seems hard to find. And I think the last thing is like the slightly underappreciated photography writer Colin Pantel wrote once about using a model of an exploded view as a photographer. An exploded view, for those that aren't familiar, is like, you'll open up a manual and the first thing it'll show you is sort of like the thing, like the vacuum cleaner or whatever, and all of its different components kind of hanging in the air. And when you see that, you can kind of see how everything fits together and how everything is separate, how everything also is connected. And you get to kind of, it draws all of the connections and the whole thing at once. And I found that that is a really relevant metaphor for what I'm trying to do, where it's like, rather than a narrative which operates in a straight line of a beginning, middle, and end, I think what I'm trying to do is just be like, look at this shit, oh my God. So I think that, animals, again, they aren't vacuums. In Australia, at least, so much of what lives here and in what quantities and where is a direct byproduct of how the country was sort of taken over, and then the industries that became predominant and powerful. And that's true everywhere, right? Like, there's no country that you couldn't say that for. Maybe you wouldn't say takeover, maybe you'd say like, population grew or whatever, but that is true everywhere. But I think what's different here is the rapidity of and the currency. Think about England. The last bear in England, I think, was killed in the 15th century. So it's ages ago. But here, like animals that were extinct, often the last member of their species, we have photographic records of, like modern photographic records. We can point to say, like, this was the spot the first cane toad or rabbit or lantana was put into this country that has then caused huge problems. We can almost pinpoint the year that the last dingo or eagle was in the Melbourne downtown area, like, because of how recent these things were. And that's a really interesting opportunity to kind of blow up.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to jump in here at the end of the video just to say that Matt and I did continue to talk after, but I didn't feel like anything else that we talked about was relevant to the actual interview, so that's why it kind of cuts off abruptly at the end. So I just wanted to jump in there to explain that and say thank you very much for watching, and thanks again to Matt for doing this conversation with me. Take care everyone, have a good day.